helps process it. And unfortunately, there's a lot of people that process trauma differently. Some people turn to the bottle that has its own set of consequences.
Yeah.
Some people take it out on their family and friends. They isolate themselves, which is not what you want to do. For me, the best way to get through it is, it's funny how I just said talking to a therapist doesn't really mean anything because I'm not getting any value. But talking to you and getting value that you bring to the table, I learn something and I get the audience to learn something as well. That's my way to process, along with making sure that I take care of myself in the gym. I'm probably in the gym way too much. I'm not a bodybuilder. I don't intend to be, but just having that zone, that time where you can zone out and do your thing.
So let's talk about that. Do you work out in the morning, at night, or are you kind of taking, say, that Joe Rogan step where he's like, I got to work out at least 3-4 times a week. It doesn't matter what time of day I do it.
Oh, I got to do 6, if not.
Wow.
If I can do 7, great. But you have to understand, especially on the work days, there's not a lot of time. So I may go into the gym 20 minutes when I get home and I'm just doing pull-ups and abs and that's it. Wow. I don't have time to be lifting heavy before I have to go to sleep in 2 hours and then go back to work. So the days where I'm not at work, that's when I spend my longer duration times in the gym. But in between work days, it's something simple and quick because while you may not get a lot of benefit after doing, let's say 100 sit-ups, the fact that you went into the gym and you did it mentally, it tells yourself, okay, I just completed what I needed to get done. I can check the box off. Because then you stop going thinking, okay, I don't have enough time. Things came up. I'll go tomorrow. I'll do a double day tomorrow. The more that builds up, now you start getting out of that routine and your body responds to that.
And little by little, it starts chipping away as you get older. And it's really hard to get back into it if you don't continue it. And I've had some older guests on the podcast and they're like, hey, fitness to me is number one. Health is number one. Like you mentioned all these crazy problems people discuss, and you probably witness them more than like what I read about and people read about. But health is number one. There's no reason, there are people that are really dealing with some crazy stuff. So take care of your body, take care of your health.
And with that, we'll just bring up one thing. People talk about the retirement issue. That is something that comes up on our podcast a lot because a lot of us grew up with that mindset that once we're done with our job, let's say 50, 55 years old, we're going to retire.
Yeah.
We don't really know what that means. If we think of retirement the way our parents did, it was you do 30 years at that job, you retire, you get the gold watch, the house is paid off, and now I'm going to enjoy my grandkids, but I'm only expected to live to about 75 years old. Yeah. So your pension wasn't really going to last that long anyway. Now we're at a point where the more of us that take care of ourselves, the more likely we're going to be able to work with no problem until we're 70 or 80 years old. Yeah. So for us, the retirement thing is a little bit different. Yes, we want to have money available to us so we're less stressed out, but I don't want to just retire and then put my feet up on the desk and drink margaritas all day. I get bored with that after about a day and a half. I still need to do something else. And when we talked about the long-term future of the podcast, I don't know what it's going to turn into in 10 or 15 years. I just know if I keep doing it, at some point it's going to morph into something that's going to keep me going beyond that.
Give you passive income, give you something to look forward to. You'll probably have friends around that you could call or people.
Who knows who I'm going to meet, who sits in that chair across me that says, you know what, I need you to help me with this or do that. Who knows? You just got to keep doing it.
Estate planning, legal, whatever. No, I completely agree. And it sounds to me like actually from what I'm picking up from this podcast is being a police officer, you're doing it, you love doing it, you love helping the community you mentioned, but also the podcast is kind of like your escape and long-term, like at peace, at ease, where you could mentally escape from some of these horrific things you may see or some of these things that are like just not what an average person would process normally, which is kind of neat. Would you say that's accurate?
Pretty accurate. And then we had mentioned the whole kid thing, and I support anybody who's great parents out there 100%. That's probably the best thing that we as human beings can do is to create the next generation and have them go out there and be productive members of society. From my point of view, it's while that may not be in the cards for me, that doesn't mean that I can't help those who do have young kids because we see a lot of people who don't have, a lot of kids who just don't have. The parents aren't in the picture.
Yeah.
No fault of their own for the kids. They were just stuck in a bad spot. And then if we don't, as a society, give them what they need, they're going to end up being unproductive members of society.
They need some direction, man. What's different between the kids nowadays and the kids as us growing up, we're very close in age, is we had some rule sets. Like you wouldn't go and smack an old lady. You know what I mean? Or push an old man down the street or for clout or to rob him. Like in my neighborhood, you would and in Russia, you would get you get destroyed. I was going to say obliterated. But you would get destroyed doing that. And out here, I'm seeing some crazy things on Instagram and so forth. It's like as if there may not be a father figure because he's working, but the level of extreme stupidity, I would call it even, or extreme just like acting out has like amplified since we were. Like you know, back in the day, I grew up in the city. So if I was drinking in public, I was like, oh my God, oh no, you know what I mean? Now people are just snorting crack and shooting up and no one even says anything. It's kind of crazy. So like the level of what's allowed, what's acceptable by society has drastically changed. And it's changed so much in the Bay Area that it's scary. You know, it's very scary to me.
It's a new
especially
challenge.
For the kids. You mentioned the kids. Yeah. Let's talk about what is your least favorite part about being a police officer, if you want to get into that. That's kind of a funny one.
That is a funny one.
Because the most part we already got, even though I didn't directly ask it. You mentioned helping the community, being there for someone, calming the situation. But what's the least favorite part?
I mean, like any job, you're going to have your good days, you're going to have your bad days. Anybody that thinks they're going to get, and this is one of the challenges I see with younger people coming in, is whatever they choose for a career, they think not only does this career have to last me 40 years, but it's got to pay me top dollar. I have to make my best friends here. Yep. They have to watch out for my needs. Every time I have a bad day, they have to be there to support me. We've gotten to this point where people think their job has to do all of that, and it was never designed to do that. You go to work, you pretty much have an agreement with your employer. You pay me this paycheck. Yeah. Here's my list of tasks that I need to do. It's my job to go out there and do those tasks the best of my ability. Some days it may mean more tasks to do and you may not want to, but you got to deal with it. Yeah. Sometimes it might be a little bit less and you can afford to invest more in the tasks that you do need to do. But I don't expect to meet my best friend at work. I don't expect my job to fulfill all my different needs. That's why I have the podcast. Yeah. Kind of fill in a gap that I don't get from my job, but I don't expect it to give that to me. So there's definitely things that happen in the course of any job where sometimes you get into disagreements with some people and you got to work it out.
With your peers.
Correct. Sometimes information comes up from the top that is unclear or nobody understands why. It could be from the city, from the state, it could be from your local agency,
there's
whatever it is.
There's so many moving parts in it.
Correct. So there's always going to be miscommunication issues there, but there's nothing about my job that I say, you know what, this sucks. I don't want to be here. It's all BS. No, you have your good days.
You know
and your
why
bad
you're
days.
there.
Correct. And again, if I depended on that job to fulfill all my needs, I'm screwing my own self because that's something that was never intended to be.
Have you had any funny incident on patrol?
I mean, define funny.
Where you're like, I can't believe I saw this. Nothing horrific or anything, but just something random. Someone gave you a funny, excuse with something.
I probably, there's a lot of funny stories that I probably shouldn't say on the air.
Sure.
But there have definitely been instances where, wow, did that just happen?
That you were caught off guard. Like, did I just see this person run backwards naked or something?
I've seen things like that. I can't think of specifics.
That's okay. We'll leave it at that. But
there are plenty of funny moments.
Okay. If you have a son, would you say, hey, I want you to be a police officer, or this is a good profession you should focus on, given what you've experienced? Or would you say, be what you want to be? What kind of father figure do you think you'd be? Would you want him to follow in your footsteps?
I wouldn't care about if he did or he didn't. It's more about giving you the tools to help decide what's best for you.
I love that.
There are some people who would love if their son followed in their exact footsteps. You take over the business from me. I love it. Yeah. And if they want to, great. But I've also seen examples of the firstborn son having to follow in dad's footsteps and they never wanted that. But then they're in that weird position where dad's expecting me to take over the business, but I really don't want to. And they kind of do it anyway. For me, it would be giving you all the tools so you can make the best decision for your own life. If you want to do what I did for a living, by all means, have at it. But if you want to take something else that you've learned and create your own business, which is something that I guess you could say the podcast is a business, but in terms of more of a profitable business, then you by all means go and do it. Maybe I could learn something from you when you take that step to say, what else could I do differently?
That's awesome. All right. Well, thank you for sharing. I know a lot of people don't want to talk about being a police officer, some of these things. Thank you for sharing that. And again, for law enforcement, thank you guys for what you do and all the day in and day out. Let's talk a little bit about personal, like, because again, you interview a lot of people. You rarely get interviewed. This is your first one you mentioned. If you were to talk to your past self, you mentioned 18, 20 years old when you were young, you were thinking of doing things. What would you say? Let's say you got the time machine back to the future, so to speak, and you're able to just go back in the past, see Mike right there. What would you tell yourself?
I've thought about that. What would I tell my 18-year-old self?
Yeah.
And it would probably be the same advice that my older cousin gave me, which was, no matter how good the advice is, I wasn't going to pay attention at 18. There's just no way I could have at that age processed what my older self would tell me. My older self could have came back at 18 and say, hey, I'm 45 years old now. This is what you went through in your life. Do A, B, and C, and you'll be fine. And I would have just said, I'm
what are
sure.
you talking about?
Yeah, I can make my own decision now. It was different for you then. Do you remember what was important to me nowadays? I wouldn't have listened. So I would like to think I could go back in time and give myself advice on financial investments, but my 18-year-old self wouldn't have listened.
So would you just say, hey, just know you're going to get through it, or you're going to have challenges?
All the dark times that you've had, the breakups, the losing a job,
don't worry about it.
You didn't get into the college that you wanted to. You will get through it. It's going to sting in the meantime, and that's part of life, and that's part of what's going to give you the life experience to move beyond that, because you can go back and revert to, hey, this happened to me when I was 18, 19, and I got through it. So if I got through that, I can get through this.
So it sounds like your thought on it is, hey, anything detailed is going to probably fly over the head of your young self. But
well, that's part of the reason why I don't do a show aimed at 18, 19-year-olds. When you're that age, you think you're